Hey guys, and welcome to Scientific Drinking, episode 24. My name is Mas. On Tuesday, SpaceX's Demo 2 mission to the International Space Station was scrubbed within 15 minutes of launch due to concerns over the weather. Why are rockets so susceptible to the weather? And why are so many launches scrubbed? It seems like every launch is delayed at least a little bit. Why is this so? Well, on this episode of Scientific Drinking, we'll find out. Cheers. So today I'm drinking a Nutter Cup chocolate peanut butter porter. Honestly, it kind of sounds like a hillbilly pickup line, doesn't it? Hey baby, do you like Reese's? You can be my Nutter Cup. On Tuesday, the Demo 2 mission, which was SpaceX's first manned mission, the first commercial manned mission, and the first launch of American astronauts from an American rocket from American soil since the end of the space shuttle program, was canceled, or at least delayed at the last minute. Called a launch scrub, this happens when the weather conditions aren't right, when there's a malfunction detected, or when there's some kind of range safety concern. Now, launches are scrubbed most frequently because of the weather. Rain, high winds, or lightning strikes all play into whether a launch goes off or not, and if any of those are occurring to any significant degree, the launch is canceled and postponed to another day. This can be really troublesome, especially when you have a narrow launch window, such as when you're trying to go from Earth to Mars or Earth to any other planet. Something like a mission to the International Space Station for Demo 2, a scrub isn't too much of a big deal. You can always postpone it to the next day without taking a big hit on launch costs because the frequency of the International Space Station passing overhead is periodic. It happens every day. Now, for my space enthusiasts out there, you might recall the video floating around of the Soyuz rocket taking a lightning strike and keep on chugging. Well, it's not the only one who can take a lightning strike. In fact, Apollo 12 took 2 lightning strikes and still succeeded in its mission to put people on the surface of the moon.
Pitching a roll program, and this baby is really going. Okay, we just lost the platform, gang. I don't know what happened here. We had everything in the world drop out.
That being said, there was damage caused by those lightning strikes, and the astronauts took precautions to correct those errors before moving on to the next stage, including having an extra orbit around the Earth to perform diagnostic testing before going off onto the moon. Lightning strikes are very dangerous, and that's why around all the launch pads you're going to see lightning towers designed specifically to protect the rocket from these kind of lightning strikes. So rain might be another issue facing a rocket when it launches. Rain by itself isn't a problem when the rocket's sitting on the launch pad, but when you start moving at several times the speed of sound, those little water droplets turn into little bullets, and they could damage your spacecraft, especially if you're in something like the space shuttle, which has very fragile tiles along the outside. Granted, they can handle tremendous heat, but they're very susceptible to kinetic impacts, as we saw from the Columbia disaster. Furthermore, when you get higher up into altitude and the temperatures drop well below freezing, those little rain droplets could turn into ice droplets, even making them even more dangerous. Even if it's not very windy at the launch pad, higher altitude winds could become a really big issue. Most rockets control their position through the gimbaling, or turning of their rocket engines at the bottom. They don't have fins or thrusters near the nose cone to help guide them when they have a lot of shear wind strain. So a strong wind could push them pretty far off course and cause it to crash. Now, although the road rings on the Space Shuttle Challenger were already degraded for another reason, it was the wind shear at higher altitudes that really caused those O-rings to break up and cause catastrophic failure of the launch and the loss of 7 astronauts. Another issue a launch might be scrubbed is because of performance or technical issues. One of the most common is engine failures or engine shutoffs. Gemini 6A had a failure at launch because one of the rocket engines shut off prematurely. Likewise, the Soyuz 33 mission had some issues with their engines right at launch that caused an abort at the very last minute. Now, another reason that a launch might be scrubbed is because of sensors, and this is kind of a common issue. The Soyuz MS-10 launch was aborted at the last minute because of a sensor issue. Fortunately, a sensor issue was easy to fix, and that mission eventually became a success. Likewise, a more recent example is Virgin Orbit, which scrubbed one of their test launches because they found a sensor issue with their rocket before they loaded it up onto the aircraft prior to launch. Now, this happens all the time. Even SpaceX has had their own fair share of sensor issues. Fortunately, sensor issues are pretty easy to identify and diagnose before launch, and genuinely pretty easy to fix. So, although this is a pretty common issue, it's usually not a major one. Now, another technical issue might be because of sound. Now, this is pretty uncommon, but it still could be a complete deal breaker for a launch. STS-1 is one example where sound became a real big issue. During the first launch of the space shuttle, the sound and shockwave generated from the start of the SRBs was so great that it pushed the structural assets of the space shuttle to their limits and caused a 3G jolt to the astronauts inside the cabin of the space shuttle. Since then, a more robust water system was added to cover and flood the launch pad before launch to dampen the sound. Now, there are other issues a launch could be scrapped. One of them is range safety. Now, it's rare that range safety issues are the cause of a launch scrubbing, but there is one very famous example where a launch of an Antares rocket out of Wallops Air Force Base was scrubbed at the last minute. The launch of the Cygnus capsule resupply service to the International Space Station was scrubbed at the last minute because a boat had wandered into the secure area downrange of the rocket. And if that rocket had experienced any error, the people on the boat could have been hit by falling debris. Now, as I mentioned, the weather is the most common cause of launch failures, especially here at Kennedy Space Center. I mean, why do we even launch out of Florida anyway? The weather's terrible. I mean, look at this. Look at that. We're supposed to be launching in like an hour and a half, and it's just pouring. So why do we even bother? What's the advantage of launching out of Florida to begin with, especially when the weather's so terrible all throughout the summer? Every afternoon it seems like it's having a downpour, a thunderstorm. Well, there are some advantages from launching in Florida, and I mentioned this in another video on Kennedy Space Center, but let's go over them again just to be thorough. Cape Canaveral was already a military base when the space program first got off the ground, so coming here was kind of a natural choice. Of course, we're going to choose a military base. Second of all, east of here is nothing but ocean, and most of the time we launch due east, so if something happens to the rocket, the risk of it landing on someone or something is actually quite low. It's just going to splash down in the ocean. And launching east is another important factor because the Earth is spinning, and every time we launch with the rotation of the Earth, we get a little bit of a velocity boost from the spinning of the Earth. And the closer we are to the equator, the greater that velocity boost is, which again plays in a factor of why we're so far south. This launch site was selected because it goes eastward at a very southerly location, pretty close to the equator, and it's attached to the continental United States, so getting the supplies here is relatively easy. Now, the United States isn't the only country to select a launch site so close to the equator. In addition to Kennedy Space Center, there's Tanegashima, French Guiana. Even Baikonur Cosmodrome was selected as the southernmost location within Soviet Russia to build a launch site that was practical. That being said, there are other launch sites around the world that don't fulfill this purpose. Vandenberg Air Force Base is selected for retrograde and polar orbits. Kodiak, Alaska is often used for polar orbits as well. And of course, Ahuriri Point in New Zealand is used to launch small satellites. Other locations have their own unique problems that you might encounter when it comes to having launches, and they could be aborted for other reasons. Kodiak, Alaska and Vostochnoye, Russia are both examples where they might have to abort a launch because of ice on the rocket that wouldn't just fall off when it launches. So although Kennedy Space Center doesn't experience this, they do have the weather issues, but there are many other advantages that make launching out of Kennedy Space Center really a practical thing overall, even for SpaceX and their Demo 2 mission, which I hope goes off in the next 30 minutes. I don't know, it just stopped raining. I guess we'll find out, right? So thanks for watching. See you next time. Cheers.
Eight, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff.